You wouldn't expect someone in your own team to stab you in the back. But that's exactly what happened. Maybe he just didn't want to believe his friend was capable of something so mean. Asuna seemed to be thinking the same thing, and Uriel spoke up as if she knew exactly what was on her mind. He was always too nice for his own good, Uriel said with a shake of her head. Then she explained. The contract scroll is like a special badge that shows who's in charge of the guild. Thinker and Kibo are the only ones who can control our guild's important stuff like member lists and money. If Thinker doesn't come back, Kibo will be in charge of everything. As Thinker's helper, I feel terrible that I couldn't stop him from getting trapped, and now it's my job to rescue him. The problem is the dungeon where he's stuck is super tough, and I'm not strong enough to beat it on my own. I also can't ask for help from my friends in the army. She looked Kirito and Asuna straight in the eye, biting her lip nervously. When I heard that 2 amazing fighters had just arrived in town, I just had to ask for your help. I couldn't resist. Uriel bowed low to Kirito and Asuna. I know this sounds crazy, but I need your help, she said. I want to rescue Thinker. She finished her long story and waited for their response. Asuna looked at Uriel carefully, trying to figure out if she was telling the truth. It was a sad fact that in the virtual world of Seoo, you couldn't always trust what people said. As they thought about it, Kirito and Asuna couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. It was possible that this whole thing was a trick to lure them out of the safe town and into trouble. Usually if you know a lot about the game you can spot when someone is trying to scam you, but Asuna and Kirito didn't know much about what was going on inside the army. So they had no idea if this story was true or not. Asuna looked over at Kirito then back at the person talking to them. She hesitated for a moment before speaking up. We'd like to help you, she said. Is there anything we can do? We need to do some digging to make sure your story checks out. Someone said. Uriel nodded, like she expected as much. I know I'm asking a lot from you, she admitted. But the thought of Thinker's name being erased from the Monument of Life in Black Iron Palace is keeping me up at night. Asuna saw the worry in Uriel's eyes, and for a moment, she wondered if she had misjudged the silver-haired woman. Uriel's proud expression started to crack, and her eyes got a little misty. This made Asuna question her doubts about Uriel's story. She really wanted to trust Uriel, but something was holding her back. After 2 years of playing in this virtual world, she knew better than to let her feelings get in the way of making smart decisions. She looked over at Kirito, and it was clear he was struggling too. His dark eyes seemed to be saying, I want to help Uriel. But what about Asuna? What's best for her? Just then Yui spoke up for the first time. She lifted her face from her cup and said, It's okay, Mama. Asuna's eyes widened in surprise. She's telling the truth. Yui said something that really caught her attention. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it. Just a few days ago, Yui's words were all mixed up and hard to understand. But now, she spoke clearly and confidently. Asuna leaned in, curious. Yui, how do you know? She asked. Yui nodded her head. I just can, she said with a smile. Kirito reached out and playfully messed up Yui's hair. It was a sweet gesture that showed how much he cared about her. Asuna's friend gave her a big grin. I'd rather try something and be wrong than not try at all, he said. Let's go for it. I'm sure everything will be okay. Asuna rolled her eyes, laughing. You're always so carefree, aren't you? She teased. But then she reached out and gently put her hand on Yui's head. Sorry, Yui, she said. We'll have to wait one more day to find your friends. Asuna leaned in and whispered. Hope you don't mind. Yui's face lit up with a big smile, and she nodded enthusiastically. Asuna gently ran her hand through Yui's super smooth black hair. One more time. Then she turned to Yui with a friendly smile. We'd be happy to help you out, she said. I know how it feels to want to save someone you really care about. Yui's eyes welled up with tears, and she bowed her head in gratitude. Thank you so much, she exclaimed. Asuna's grin returned. Let's save the thanks for later, she said. First, we need to rescue Thinker. Sasha had been quietly listening to the conversation, but now she suddenly clapped her hands together. Time to eat, she exclaimed. There's tons of food left, so dig in. Don't be afraid to take seconds. And that includes you, Uriel. Outside, the weak winter sun shone through the colorful trees, casting pale shadows on the cobblestone streets. Imagine a huge town that feels super empty and chilly. This was the town of beginnings, where hardly anyone dared to venture into its back alleys. But one brave group was about to change that. Asuna and Kirito were ready for action, armed and all set. Kirito even had Yui perched on his shoulder. Thanks to her stubbornness. You see, Asuna wanted to leave Yui with their friend Sasha, but Yui was determined to join the adventure. So with Uriel leading the way, the group set off into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. Their pockets were packed with special teleport crystals, just in case things got crazy. If everything went wrong, they'd have to make a tough choice and bail, leaving Uriel behind. Hey, wait a minute, Kirito shouted to Uriel, I just remembered something super important that I forgot to ask you about. Which floor is the dungeon on? Someone asked. The girl replied, this one. Asuna's eyes widened in surprise. You mean this floor right here? She asked. Just to make sure. The girl nodded. There's a huge dungeon underneath the town of beginnings. She explained. I think Thinker is stuck at the very bottom of it. Kirito let out a frustrated groan. No way, I didn't see anything like that when I was testing the game, he said, shaking his head. Oh no, I totally missed it. So you know how the army is based out of Black Iron Palace? Well, it turns out that's also where you can find the secret entrance to this awesome dungeon, and it's hidden in the basement. The weird thing is you can't even get into the dungeon until you've made it past a certain point on the upper floors. It was a total surprise discovery, and we only stumbled upon it after Kibo took charge. He had big plans to use the dungeon's resources just for his own group, which wasn't fair at all. He didn't tell Thinker or me about it for a pretty long time. I get it, someone said. New dungeons usually have super rare items that only show up once. After that, they're gone forever. They must have made a ton of money from it, but Uriel shook his head, looking a bit uncomfortable. Actually, that's not what happened, he said. The thing is, this dungeon was really tough and scary, even for a beginner level. Imagine facing monsters that are as tough as the ones you'd find on the 60th floor or higher. That's what Kiba's team ran into. And let me tell you, they were in way over their heads. They got beat up so badly that they had to use an emergency teleport to escape with their lives. The problem was it cost them a ton of crystals, so many that the whole trip wasn't even worth it. Kirito couldn't help but laugh at Kiba's misfortune. Ha ha ha, serves them right, he chuckled. Uriel smiled back at him, but her grin quickly faded. Her face turned serious again as she thought about their own challenge ahead. This just means that rescuing Thinker is going to be even tougher than we thought, she said, her voice filled with concern. Remember that super tricky corridor crystal? Kibo had marked its destination way back when he was running for his life through the dungeon. And guess where Thinker ended up after traveling through it? Same place. The problem is, I'm not strong enough to take on all those monsters at once. In fact, fighting them one-on-one is even a challenge for me, let alone trying to beat a whole bunch of them in a row. Hey, can I ask you something? Someone said to Kirito and Asuna. Are you two up for a challenge? Kirito started to say something, but Asuna jumped in to finish his sentence. I think we can handle it, she said with confidence. They were talking about exploring the dungeon on the 60th floor. To do that safely, you needed to be at least level 70. Luckily, Asuna was already at level 87, and Kirito was an even higher level, over 90. They were definitely ready for whatever lay ahead. Uriel looked worried. I know we can protect Yui while exploring the dungeon, she said, which made Yui feel a little better. But then Uriel dropped some bad news. There's something else that's bothering me, she said. One of our scouts told us about a gigantic monster deep inside the dungeon. It's like a boss, super strong and tough to beat. Asuna and Kirito exchanged a nervous glance. Do you think this boss is as powerful as the monsters on the 60th floor? They wondered. Hey, remember that tough boss we fought? Someone asked. Wasn't it the stone samurai in armor? Another person replied. Oh yeah, him. He wasn't so bad, right? They both turned to Uriel and nodded confidently. We've got this, they said. Uriel's face finally broke into a smile, her eyes scrunching up like she was looking at something super bright. I'm so glad to hear that, she exclaimed. You guys have done boss battles before. I feel bad for wasting your time. Asuna jumped in. Don't worry about it. We're on break right now. Just then, a huge shiny black building came into view ahead of them. It was massive. Imagine walking up to the biggest building in the town of beginnings, the amazing Black Iron Palace. As you step inside the front door, you'll find a special room with something really cool called the Monument of Life. It's like a huge list that shows the names of every single player in the game. Anyone can come and check it out. But don't think about going any further. The army is in charge of everything else in the palace. But Uriel had other plans. Instead of taking them through the main entrance, she led them on a sneaky detour around to the back of the palace. What were they getting themselves into? Imagine walking along a street surrounded by super tall castle walls and a deep, yucky moat that keeps everyone out. The walls and moat stretch out as far as you can see, with no breaks or weak spots. It's totally empty, not a single person is around. After walking for a bit, Uriel stops at a staircase that heads down from the street to the moat water. But here's the cool part. The stairs don't stop at the water's edge. Instead, they keep going down into a dark tunnel carved into the stone wall. This is our way in, Uriel says. These stairs lead to the secret sewers under the palace. And that's where we'll find the entrance to the mysterious dungeon. Asuna warned, "It's pretty dark and tight in there." She looked at Yui, who was still snuggled up in Kirito's arms, and frowned with worry. But Yui's face scrunched up in a stubborn grimace. "I'm not afraid," she said loudly. Asuna couldn't help but laugh. Uriel didn't know much about Yui, just that she lived with them. She seemed unsure about taking Yui into a super dangerous dungeon. Asuna quickly spoke up to calm her down. "Don't worry about her," someone said with a smile. "She's way tougher than she looks." Kirito chuckled and nodded in agreement. "Yeah, she's going to be an amazing warrior one day." Asuna gave him a glance and he laughed even harder. Uriel looked happy with the plan. "Okay, let's get moving," Kirito shouted, then he went into action. With a loud Nawasa, he swung his right sword straight at a monster. The blade sliced right through it. Next, with a mighty Ryasa, he swung his left sword and sent the monster flying across the room. Kirito was using something called dual blades, which meant he was fighting with two swords at once. He hadn't used this cool move in a while, so he was letting loose and having fun. All the energy he had built up during his break was coming out in his exciting battle moves. Imagine being on a crazy adventure with your friends. Asuna was stuck holding Yui's hand, and Uriel had her trusty metal whip ready. But whenever they ran into giant frogs or crayfish with huge shiny claws, Kirito would charge in like a superhero. He'd swing his arms and legs wildly, creating a whirlwind that destroyed everything in its path. Asuna just rolled her eyes and sighed. She was used to Kirito's bold moves. But Uriel was totally amazed. Her eyes were wide and her mouth was hanging open as she watched Kirito take down their enemies with ease. It was like he had gone berserk. Imagine walking into a battle scene that's totally insane. Yui's happy voice shouting, "Good luck, Papa," made it even more ridiculous. It had been about 20 minutes since they entered the spooky black stone dungeon from the stinky sewers. The place was huge and packed with monsters, way more than they thought it would be. But Kirito's super cool dual blades made everything easier. He was like a gaming superhero. Thanks to him, the two girls weren't even tired. Then someone suddenly said, I'm sorry." Uriel looked sorry as he said, "I feel like I'm making you do all the hard work." Asuna gave a small smile. "Don't worry, he's just really upset. Let him get it all out," she said. Just then Kirito walked up, his ears perking up at the conversation. "Hey, that was pretty harsh," he said with a grin. "Want to trade places?" he asked, but Asuna just said, "Not yet." Asuna and Uriel exchanged a knowing glance and smiled at each other. Then, Asuna pulled out her map and pointed to a blinking dot. "Look, Thinker is right here," she said, showing them where their friend was on the map. The group was making great progress, but there was one big problem. They didn't have a map of the dungeon. That meant they had no idea what lay between them and their target, Thinker. Still, they were getting close. They had already traveled at least 70% of the way. "Thinker hasn't moved in days," someone said. "I think he's hiding in a safe spot. If we can just get to him, we can teleport him to safety." The team was relieved and grateful for each other's help. They were all working together to rescue Thinker. "Almost there," Kirito exclaimed, waving his hands wildly. Uriel had just bowed to him, but Kirito didn't want any special treatment. "Honestly, I'm only doing this because it's fun," he said with a grin. "And of course I get some cool items out of it." Asuna's curiosity was piqued. "Find anything good?" she asked. Kurito nodded enthusiastically. He quickly scrolled through his menu and want. Splat. A weird reddish-black chunk of meat appeared. It looked pretty gross, but Kurito seemed excited about it. Asuna jumped back from the weird blob. Gross. What is that thing? She asked. The other person replied. It's frog meat. Sometimes the craziest foods can be super delicious. Can you cook it for me? Asuna was totally grossed out. No way, she shouted, opening her own window on the screen. She and Kurito shared a list of items they had collected, called an inventory. Asuna quickly scrolled through it until she found something that made her go, "You domain 24 pieces of scavenged toad meat." She dragged it to the trash icon and got rid of it. The other person was surprised. What? They asked. No, Kurito yelled, and Uriel burst out laughing so hard that she doubled over, holding her stomach. It was hilarious. Yuri's face lit up with a big smile. She's finally laughing, she exclaimed. Asuna thought for a moment, and then it clicked. Yuri had started laughing yesterday, too, right after they had chased away the bad guys and made all the kids happy and cheerful. Imagine a girl who was super sensitive to laughter. It's as if she could hear it from a mile away. Was this just part of her personality, or had something tough that happened to her made her this way? Asuna scooped up Yuri and gave her a big hug. She promised herself that she'd make the little girl laugh as much as possible. Let's keep going, Asuna exclaimed. They ventured deeper into the mysterious dungeon. At first they saw lots of fishy creatures like giant squids and ugly eels. But as they went further in, things started to get spooky. They began to run into zombies, ghosts and other creepy undead monsters. It was getting scarier by the minute. Asuna felt a shiver run down her spine, but Kurito was quick to save the day. With his two swords flashing in the light, he defeated the spirits and sent them to their final rest. Usually players wouldn't dare to explore areas that were way too tough for them. It's just not cool to recklessly charge in when you're not strong enough. But since they were all alone, Kurito and Asuna could do whatever they wanted without worrying about what others might think. Imagine if Asuna had more time to think. She might have said, "Hey, let's give Uriel a chance to help out. She could learn a lot and get stronger." But their main mission was to rescue Thinker. And they couldn't waste any time. Before they knew it, 2 hours flew by. Luckily they were getting closer and closer to the safe area where they hoped to find Thinker. It wasn't happening fast enough, but at least they were making progress. Finally, after taking down what felt like a million skeleton warriors, Kurito and his friends caught a break. They stumbled upon a super bright corridor that looked like a cozy heaven. Yes, the safety zone, Asuna exclaimed. Kurito quickly used his search skill to check it out, and his face lit up with a nod. There's only one player inside, and they're friendly. Their name is green on my screen, he said. Uriel couldn't contain her excitement. It's Thinker, she blurted, charging forward in her clanking metal armor. Kurito and Asuna rushed after her, still gripping their swords tightly. Together they sprinted down the hallway, following the warm glow. The corridor curved to the right, and soon they reached a big intersection. What would they find there? As they walked down the hallway, a small room came into view. It was super bright in there, almost too bright. After being stuck in the dark dungeon for so long, their eyes had to adjust quickly, but they could make out a figure standing inside. He was frantically waving his arms at them, but his face was hidden because of the strong light behind him. Suddenly he let out a loud shout. Uriel. He had recognized her, and couldn't wait to get her attention. Uriel waved back and took off in a sprint. Thinker, she yelled, her voice shaken with tears. But before she could say another word, a loud scream cut her off. Stay back. The corridor is. Asuna shouted, slowing down to be careful. But Uriel didn't hear him. She was too busy running towards the room with the light on. Just as she was about to get there, something caught everyone's attention. A yellow cursor popped up out of nowhere, right at the corner of the hall, just a few feet away from the safe room. Asuna's eyes widened as she checked the name that popped up, the Fatal Stithe. She knew that the before the name meant big trouble. It was a boss monster. Just then, Asuna saw Uriel in danger and yelled, Uriel, stop, come back. The yellow cursor on her screen was moving fast, heading straight for the intersection where Uriel was standing. They were running out of time, only seconds to spare. Just as all hope seemed lost, Kurito suddenly disappeared from Asuna's side. Or at least it looked that way. Suddenly he zoomed forward at lightning speed. The walls shook from the shockwave. In a flash he covered the last few meters and grabbed Uriel from behind with one hand. With his other hand, he slammed his sword into the ground, making the metal scream in protest. Sparks exploded everywhere. They stopped just short of the open intersection, screeching to a halt so fast that the air seemed to sizzle. Suddenly a huge dark shape thundered by, filling the empty space. The yellow cursor darted about 30 feet down the corridor to the left, then stopped in its tracks. Whatever was making that shadow slowly turned around, getting ready to make another run. Kirito quickly let go of Uriel, grabbed his sword from the stone, and took off running down the left corridor. Asuna rushed to catch up with him. She helped Uriel, who was still dazed, stand up and pushed her across the street. Then she handed Yui over to Uriel, saying get her to a safe place, now. Uriel's face was white with worry, but she nodded and took Yui in her arms. Asuna watched as they headed towards the safety of the light. Feeling a little better, Asuna pulled out her own sword, a rapier, and turned back to face the danger. That's when she saw Kirito's back. He was standing with his two swords at the ready, facing whatever was coming their way. Behind him loomed a giant figure in a ripped black cloak. It stood about 8 feet tall. The hood of the cloak was like a dark cave, and its sleeves seemed to be alive with wiggling shadows. But what really caught your attention were the eyes, two big, buggy, bloodshot peepers, staring out from a face that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. And those creepy eyes were fixed right on the people below. Meet the creepiest creature ever. It was holding a huge black scythe in its right hand, and it looked super scary. There were globs of red stuff dripping from the curved blade. It was totally gross. This thing was like a real-life version of the Grim Reaper, the legendary harvester of souls. The creature's eyes locked onto Asuna, and she felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if her heart had been grabbed by an icy fist. But Asuna tried to be brave. She told herself, wait a minute. I've got this. The numbers don't lie, it can't be that deadly. Right? She was trying to use logic to calm her nerves. But it wasn't working very well. Just as Asuna was getting ready to fight with her rapier, Kirito yelled out in a shaky voice. Asuna, go back to the others. And get them to safety. Now. We need to teleport them out of here. ASAP. Asuna was taken aback. What? Why? She asked. But Kirito's tone was serious. This thing is super tough, he warned. I tried to use my identification skill, but I couldn't even see its stats. I think it's a monster from the 90th floor or higher. Asuna's eyes widened in shock. She gulped hard, and her body froze up, ready for the worst. As they chatted, a creepy reaper started floating through the air towards them. I'll hold it off, you guys go now. One of them yelled. Men. No. Wait. You have to come with us. But the other person insisted. I'll be right behind you, just hurry up and get out of here. They knew they had to move fast. Even their trusty teleport crystal, their last hope, wasn't a sure thing. It took a few precious seconds to use, from grabbing the crystal to deciding where to go, and finally disappearing into thin air. Imagine you're in a crazy battle and you need to teleport to safety. But if a monster whacks you before you can finish teleporting, it's like hitting the reset button, you're stuck where you are. This is super bad news, especially when your team is in chaos and trying to make a quick escape. Asuna was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If she went back to help her friends get away, Kirito might be able to use his super speed to reach the safe zone on his own. But what if he couldn't?